Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, we try to tackle your toughest maintenance questions. So if you have a real toughie, email it to us at podcast@aopa.org, and we'll take a whack at it.
And always remember to click and subscribe so you never miss a show.
And if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and other good stuff that we send out, easiest way to do that is to pick up your smartphone and text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and your phone will magically ask you for your name and email address and add you to our mailing list. So just text SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to put yourself on our mailing list.
Magic phones.
So I hear there's a pending Cirrus AD on the throttle lever coming out. What's up with that?
Not pending
Is it pending? Yeah, I thought it actually happened.
As of, I think, yesterday. Well, I don't know when this is going to air, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so on certain models, they include a little cutout in the throttle lever. I mean, the arm that comes up where you actually put your hand on the throttle, and it has a hole in it, so the go-around button switch wires can feed through it. And it just reduces the amount of material that's there. So they're cracking, and they've had several failures. A friend of mine actually that works on Cirrus saw a failure of one back in 2017. So it's not a new thing, but the AD is written very strangely on the initial compliance. So it takes a bit of effort to figure out when. Surprise, right? It's you do it at 1,200 hours or by the so many days from the date of effectivity of the AD. Anyway, there's a lot of discussion about what all that actually means, but it's going to be repetitive.
Of course, the rub on this is, which is very typical of ADs, is it's not a very expensive part, but they're back ordered until March, and
you're right.
that's probably going to get even worse.
Yep.
Ouch.
And the labor is kind of a pain because it's mounted in the center console.
Oh, right.
And the FAA, one of our favorite things is they still think that typical shop rate is $85 an hour.
Yeah, that's right.
Paul, you are cheap.
This one isn't the worst of those, but the FAA is required to come up with an estimated cost of compliance, and they still calculate it out at $85 an hour. There's probably some good old boy down in Texas who still charges $85 an hour, but you have to search really hard to find him.
Yeah.
When this lever breaks off, how much is left to grab onto?
Not much.
Not much.
Do you have a screwdriver? You could put a screwdriver in there and
if you
move it around.
Yeah, because we all keep screwdrivers in that center console.
I have a multi-tool in my glove compartment just in case things like this happen. But oh, yikes!
And does this happen? Is this for all Cirruses or specific? When has it been happening?
It's all. It seems to occur more on the flight training airplanes. I don't know if people are more ham-fisted about how they slap the throttle forward and back or whatever.
Those instructors.
Yeah. I don't know if it's instructors or the students are panicking or something. Yeah. I got to do something quick or he's going to make me pull the chute. But it is limited to just airplanes that have the hole in the lever for the go-around switch. I wouldn't say that if the airplane doesn't have a go-around switch, it won't have this hole in it. But I will say if the hole is not there, it doesn't apply. It's only certain part number throttle levers.
And the replacement part,
is the stress rally.
Have a hole?
That's kind of the problem right now. We know the part numbers and we can order the parts, but I haven't seen a replacement one to know if it's made the same way. Hopefully not, because then it'll have the same 1,200 hour.
I read the preamble to the AD, and it said this AD is intended as an interim action, and Cirrus is working on a terminating action. Okay. So that presumably means they're trying to design a new throttle lever.
Yeah.
But if you have to replace the throttle lever now under the AD, you're going to replace it with the same old part that has the same problem.
Yeah.
Right.
I think still the earliest comments. Yeah, the earliest failure time on these was something over 2,000 hours.
Right.
Okay.
But in the FAA's abundance of caution, they made the compliance time 1,200 hours. If the lever has more than 1,200 hours, it's got to go.
So the real concern is, depending on where the throttle lever is when it fails and where you are in the flight, if you happen to be reducing power and it breaks off and you need power, that's an issue. If it breaks off at full throttle, that's not so bad because you can just control with mixture. But sometimes that lever is really hard to move. I think if you reach down in the slot to try to move it, you might get some movement, but it's still going to be it's going to be stressful.
Do those things have a friction knob like on a twin where
they do?
You can loosen it up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
You can grab it with your multi-tool.
Yeah. Well, the friction knob is on the right hand of the console, and it's a pain to get to because it's down low, and it's often, depending on where your co-pilot is sitting, your arm may have to go between the seat and the console to get to it. It's amazing how many owners don't even know there's one there. It's kind of bizarre.
I remember years ago when I was training for my multi-engine rating. This is before I bought my 310. I was training in a rental Cessna 310 Q, and it came in for a landing, and one of the throttle cables disconnected. And that engine could not be powered back, and I wound up having to cut the mixture control to land the airplane. So this sounds kind of like a similar situation. I'm gonna get up on my soapbox very briefly and mention that two of my big beefs about the FAA's airworthiness directive process that has bugged me for years and years now. One is that when they issue an airworthiness directive, they are not required to determine whether parts will actually be available. And we ran into this recently with that turbo clamp AD where they mandated all these turbo clamps, and there just aren't any. It's months and months and months out to get those things. And this sounds like another one where where everybody's going to have to change throttle levers, but there aren't enough throttle levers to go around.
Right.
And the FAA isn't required to consider that when they issue an AD, which I think is unfortunate. And my other big beef about the AD process is that the FAA is not required to assess the risk of the compliance action to see whether the cure is worse than the disease, and sometimes it is.
Yep.
But they aren't. They go through this very elaborate process to determine whether the condition is an unsafe condition that warrants an AD. But they don't have to go through a similar process to determine whether the corrective action is risky and it might cause more safety problems than the problem that it was intended to. And I asked a FAA guy about that once at a conference, and he said, "Oh yeah, the FAA assumes that any maintenance that's done to comply with an AD is always done perfectly."
Well, they should use the same reasoning, I would think, and assume that all pilots do everything exactly correct.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting thought. So all of us mechanics should suddenly feel much better that the FAA has so much more confidence in our abilities than they do in the pilot's abilities. I think that's amazing.
And they think you're doing it for very little money too. So.
That's right.
$85 an hour. Yeah,
we're working on the cheap, and we're doing a better job.
Perfection. at at a bargain price.
And I believe in
What more
Peter
can you ask?
Pan. Our first question is from Robert, who's trying to sniff out a dangerous problem. Go ahead, Robert.
Hi, thank you guys for having me on today. Long-time listener and first-time asker. Very thankful for that.
Cool.
So I'm an A&P, IA, also private pilot that's working towards my instrument rating. The flight school I was training with had a Piper Cherokee 140 that recently set off my instructor's carbon monoxide detector. First, biologically, she started feeling extremely unwell while flying, which prompted her to bring an actual meter up.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it was showing 300 to 400 parts per million.
Wow.
I think it peaked at 550. After getting back and inspecting, found that the muffler was severely cracked and leaking exhaust into the cabin through the heating and defrost system. But after the muffler was replaced, as well as the exhaust shroud, the cockpit was still picking up about 10 to 30 ppm of carbon monoxide in cruise flight, and was higher during lower airspeeds. So the main question is, what is an acceptable level of carbon monoxide in an aircraft?
That's a very, very interesting question. The PA-28 was certified under the old CAR 3 regs, and under CAR 3 there was no criterion, certification criterion for carbon monoxide. The new Part 23 regs actually do have a requirement that the aircraft have no more than 50 parts per million of CO in the cockpit. Is 50 parts per million of CO in the cockpit an acceptable level? Well, depends. The fire department would consider it an acceptable level. I don't consider it an acceptable level because the effects of carbon monoxide and the effects of altitude hypoxia are cumulative. So the amount of impairment you get from a certain level of carbon monoxide is much higher when you're up at altitude than it is when you're down on the ground. So I personally would not be real comfortable with anything over about 20 parts per million. But now another interesting thing is that the level of carbon monoxide in the cockpit will vary dramatically with your leaning technique.
Right.
Most people don't talk about that. But if you're seeing significant CO on your meter and you transition to a peak EGT or lean a peak, you'll magically see the CO go away because the carbon monoxide is the product of incomplete combustion of hydrocarbons. If there's enough oxygen to combust the hydrocarbons completely, the byproduct of combustion is carbon dioxide and water, and you only get carbon monoxide when it's incomplete combustion, which is what happens when you're rich at peak. You have more fuel than you have oxygen to consume it, so some of the hydrocarbons in the fuel are not being completely combusted, and that's when you get carbon monoxide.
So you're getting a double bonus lean of peak. You're getting more bang for your buck out of the fuel, and you're getting less CO products that could be getting into the cockpit. So what's not to like?
I think one of the things Robert was trying to get at is how does this CO get into the cockpit if the exhaust system is now in tip-top shape? And the answer is that the exhaust, it comes out of the exhaust pipe and it clings to the fuselage as it's going backwards. We once had a case of just massive amounts of carbon monoxide that was getting into the cockpits of Mooneys that had air conditioning systems installed. And the air conditioning system in the Mooney was installed back in the tail. It was an electric system. and it had its air intake along I believe it was the right side of the empennage, and that was sucking all sorts of carbon or exhaust, stuff in. And if the mixture was rich at peak, there was a lot of carbon monoxide in there. In retractable gear airplanes, we frequently see a lot of it coming up through the wheel wells and up through the floorboards. And obviously the PA 28140 is not retractable, but any inspection plates on the belly that aren't sealing right, or any of the plates on the floor that are not,
or a baggage door seal that's not sealing very well.
Yeah.
This being a Cherokee, where you're probably going to find it, there are two primary places: the forward wing attach point. There are blades that come in and bolts that attach on the inside. And where that forward spar comes through, there should be like leather, sort of like engine baffle material that should seal around that. And then the main spar wing roots are like I-beams that come into the cabin. You see all the bolts on the belly. And there's a void on the front and aft side of the spar where it enters the cabin. And there should be pieces of foam about 1 inch square and about 8 inches long. They get stuffed in there. And if the wings have ever been off, and they have probably at some point, or someone saw those pieces in there and said, "Oh, this is useless," and they peel them out and throw them away. Because in most airplanes that are using exhaust heat for cabin heat, the air blows in around the muffler, and that air is under pressure. So unless the muffler has a crack or some sort of void, you don't get air from the engine compartment into this. And people are all the time wanting to seal up firewalls and all that. But the exhaust, like Mike said, is coming out underneath the belly. So you're not, generally speaking, you're not getting much air from the engine compartment this dangerous into the cabin. So it's going to be somewhere downstream of the exhaust pipe. So that's where I would be looking. Also, on the Cherokee, there's this huge open area underneath the back seats. And if you take the back seats out or just flip that board up, it literally will somewhat hinge up. There's all sorts of openings where the flap torque tubes extend out through the cabin. You have cables that go back to the tail. There's a lot of openings in there, a lot of opportunities for getting exhaust into the cabin. That's where I would be.
Robert, what kind of CO detector are you using? Is it a portable one you can move around, or is it?
It was a portable, just handheld unit. I think it was the Amazon Special. I'm not sure of the exact brand, but.
Okay, and then the other question is how fast is its response time? If you have a movable CO detector that has a relatively fast response time, then with a Confederate you can you can sniff around in flight, moving the thing around to different locations, and see where you are getting sort of a peak reading, and sort of get some sense of where this stuff is coming in.
Yeah.
Okay, and it does have a probe on it, like a normal leak detector type probe. So that actually is a great idea. Didn't even think about doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like I said, the FAA says up to 50 parts per million is acceptable. I wouldn't be happy with 50 parts per million.
I was not either, especially on a landing checklist, trying to get everything lined up and then worrying about that thing beeping. But it also makes sense because we noticed it the most on approach when we were going full rich mixture.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, another time you can see one of those CO detectors go into alarm is if you're in the run-up area behind another airplane that's running god awful rich and putting out a whole bunch of that stuff.
You can usually smell that way before the alarm goes off.
Good. Well, great question. I mean, everybody thinks it comes from the engine compartment, so they think firewall. So think outside the box.
Thank you for clarifying that. Those are things I did not think about.
It's coming out the pipe. Well, unless you have
running down the belly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great question, Robert. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, stay warm.
Our next question is from John, who's had a really strange prop strike. I've seen a bunch. I've not seen this one. Tell us about it, John.
Well, I guess the question is, can you have a prop strike if you don't have a prop on the engine? So the story is I bought an RV9, partially assembled, and the engine was on, no propeller. I bought it out of state, loaded it in the back of a U-Haul truck, and drove it home. The wings were not on, so everything fit nicely in the truck. But I stopped partway to check on it, and I discovered to my horror that the binder straps had slipped, and the fuselage was banging around inside the back of the U-Haul.
Ouch.
And the prop, or the Vance they give you this props simulator so that you can set up the cowling, was banging against the back door of the van, enough that it chewed a pretty good sized chunk out of the wood.
Wow.
So my question is this something that I should be concerned about? And if so, what should I do? What should I look at? There's no real specs on end play that I could find in the crankshaft. It's not a run out issue. So I don't even know where to start looking.
You say it's not a run out issue. Did you check the run out of the flange?
Not with a dial indicator, no.
Oh, so you want to put a dial indicator on it. It ought to be less than 3 thousandths. Wait, that's Continental. At any rate, 3 thousandths. Gosh, I get them mixed up.
It will be.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But you want to check it so that you can know.
Do I understand this correctly? This is a prop simulator strike that we.
Yeah, it's not a simulated prop strike. It's a prop simulator strike.
That is new. Right.
Yeah. So what they have you do is you bolt the spinner, or you put the spinner against the flywheel, and then you just take PVC tubes, slide them over the prop bolts, and there's another flange that goes on the front, so it sets the distance where the prop would be, so that you can work on the cowling and get the cowling to line up. All those bolts were loose afterwards, and one of them is tight when I turn it into the bushing that's in the flange.
So, question, because I haven't seen this device that you're talking about, so I need a little bit more information.
I'm not sure if I could share a picture.
You probably have to send it to Ian for him to post.
Okay.
So the propeller bolts are screwed into the flange, because on the Lycoming and on some other engines, but on the Lycoming,
They're on the
prop. Nuts are swedged basically into the flange.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you screw the bolts into the flange, there's no nut that you're turning. You're just screwing bolts into the flange, which is threaded, correct?
Right.
Well, there's like a bushing that's pressed.
It's a bushing. It's a threaded bushing.
Yeah.
Yes. It's pressed into place.
Right.
So you're screwing the bolts into that. So when the airplane's moving around, it was the bolts that were making contact, not the flange directly.
Correct.
Okay. I'm saying all those as statements, but they were really questions. So I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's why we're here.
That adds a certain amount of leverage. So you definitely want to dial the shaft. That would be a number one thing to do. I would really want to do a good inspection of those bushings, just because they're not designed.
Well, you said one of the bolts screws in hard.
Yeah. It's tight.
Have you tried pulling that one out and trying a different bolt in that same hole?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the different bolts they're all the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
In there. So and I don't think the bolts, the bushing moved yeah.
Yeah, so I'd be concerned about that. The other thing this is a different kind of prop strike. So it's the bending loads, I'm not real worried about. We can measure that. If the flange is not bent, then I'm not worried about bending loads. you don't have rotational, so I'm not worried about like magnetos, the plastic gears in the mags, and counterweights if there are any in this engine and that sort of thing.
Yep.
But I am worried about, or not worried, but concerned about the forward and aft impact. There should be some in play in the crankshaft. It's not much, but it's enough that you can hear it clunk, clunk back and forward. But it all depends on how hard that hit as to what it may have done relative to the bearings and to the post inside the engine. I would be surprised if it did any damage to it.
The thrust washer should be taking that impact, right? If
It should be, right. But now I'm trying to think of a way to quantify what it may have done and then how to determine if damage was or wasn't done. Because you don't know how hard it hit this door. You can assume you didn't slam on the brakes, you didn't get rear-ended, so it's just kind of rolling around. And I can't imagine it hit very hard.
It hit hard enough that there's plywood on the inside of the door, and it chewed up the plywood.
Right, but
good.
that could be rubbing. That's not like a single impact. That's just sitting there, just kind of bouncing.
Well, it was kind of bouncing.
So you got a lot of vertical. I'm really not that worried about
the bolts weren't bent, so that's.
I mean, as near as I can tell, I rolled them on a flat surface, and they're pretty robust.
What metal are those bushings made out of? The threaded bushings in the HUD?
They're steel.
Plated steel.
Yeah, I think they're the same as the flange. I'm not sure. I shouldn't say that. They are substantial.
And I believe one of them is the index.
Oh, the crankshaft
right?
flange.
One is larger.
Also serves as the index.
Yep. Yeah. Well, do you think it'd be worth it to just go ahead and replace them? No, or not worth it?
I don't think so.
Are those bushings even replaceable?
I believe they are.
They are replaceable. I'm not sure that they're field replaceable. I've never replaced those.
I was going to guess there was some sort of interference fit in there.
They're pressed in, I would think.
Yeah, I've never done that. I'm not really worried about that so much. I'm just trying to imagine, in an abundance of caution, what could have happened inside the engine. And it just doesn't sound to me like there was really a lot of impact. It's just kind of it hits the door. And when I say hit, I don't mean like it runs into it like a car crashing into a wall. It just gets up to the door and the door stops it from rolling. And it just sits there and it vibrates and bounces as you're driving down the highway. So the airplane, another question, the airplane is facing aft. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I've hauled a lot of airplanes on trailers and on top of trucks and various combinations of that. Anytime you're loading something, everything wants to go forward, because when you brake, there's way more force to move things forward. There are very few vehicles that can accelerate fast enough, and a U-Haul being one of them, to actually make something slam to the rear of the truck. It just doesn't have that kind of capability. So I can't imagine that there's a lot of impact harm.
Okay. I'm trying not to join your Overthinkers Anonymous club here. And
we love
you. That's a precondition for.
That's right. And I'm trying real hard to overthink this because I don't want to miss something.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is if it had slammed into a metal door.
Oh, that'd be way different.
That might have been different, but it's like a prop strike with a wooden prop. The wood takes a lot of the impact and cushions almost. So
because it's a lot softer than the metal bolts.
I'm not 100%.
I did look.
I was going to say, if you had an actual propeller on the airplane, and I've seen propellers try to work their way through wooden floors of trailers and that sort of thing, and I have yet to see the propeller not win.
Yeah.
So this was basically hitting the tailgate, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like a wooden tailgate.
What we needed is a tailgate simulator. That's
to go with the propeller simulator.
The whole thing would be simulated. Yeah. It rotates free, and with the spark plugs out, there's no weird noises or anything like that.
Yeah, there wouldn't be.
That's good.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're not too worried.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's easy for us to say.
Yeah, it's easy for us to say.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of something constructive to do.
Yeah, well, dial the flange with a dial indicator.
You
That's
definitely have to
constructive.
dial the flange. Pay attention to the threaded bushings, and I'm trying to think. I just can't think of something on the back of the engine.
Like
With
the
all
magnetos.
the
Would it chew
magnetos,
up mag
gears. You've got the oil pump and fuel pump, all those gears in the back.
Most of
Are
us
attached to the crankshaft, basically.
wouldn't even care.
No, they wouldn't care because the gear is moving fore and aft, so that's not going to
Yeah.
do anything to the other gears because the teeth are just sliding within each other.
Right.
Right.
There were no magnetos on it at the time.
Oh,
Even better.
So yeah, they were in the box, safe.
Good.
I can't think of anything else that you should check.
If the run out is more than, I believe it's 5,000. So I think
5. Yeah, Continental's 3. Lycoming is 5. Yes.
If it is more than that, what's the fixer? Or is that to worry about?
You're pulling the crankshaft.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not straightening that.
But
although I have seen them straighten on the engine,
be.
but you're not doing it.
Yeah.
But it won't be. So
It
don't
won't
worry
be.
about it.
Yeah.
But check it.
Just check it, log it, and then relax.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
We
an
haven't gotten
interesting
this
question.
one yet, John. It's the first one to
Well,
tell
that's why
us
I thought
about damage.
it would be interesting.
First I heard of a prop simulator. I like that.
That's
concept.
right. We didn't even need engine data for this one.
No. And this engine actually was overhauled and has never been run yet. It's still
Wow.
brand new or new inside. I did bore scope it when I got it.
Hey, it's still under warranty.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting engine too. But when you bore scope it, the top of the pistons still have the Sharpie number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 on them. So
That's
it
cool.
literally has never run. Or it did run, but it was overhauled with new cylinders and new pistons.
Well, very cool. That's a wonderful question. Thank you for calling.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate
All
it.
right, John. Enjoy the plane.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Our next call is from Jesse, who wants to make sure he's taking good care of his engines. How you doing, Jesse?
Good. How are you?
Great. Good to have you on. What's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Hopefully this will be an easy one for you.
Yeah, me too.
That would be nice for a change.
That'd be nice.
So a month or so ago on another episode, you guys were talking about the Continental service bulletin that restricts engine RPM to 2,300 or above in cruise. And you guys mentioned that rich a peak, that would probably be a good idea. However, if you're lean a peak, it might be okay to go below that. So I have a turbo 310R, and my typical cruise profile is like 2,100 to 21 RPM, 31 inches of manifold pressure, and lean a peak. And the reasons I choose that is one, I've heard Mike talk about where lower RPM is better for lean a peak, but also it seems like in my airplane, 2,100 to 2,150 seems to be about the smoothest setting, and 2,300 is about one of the rougher settings. So that's another reason for choosing 2,100. I climb 2,500 RPM, rich a peak, also at 31 inches of manifold pressure. And so at a transition, what I've typically done is pull the RPM back to 2,100 and then transition to lean a peak, left engine first usually, and then the right. So my question is, based on the suggestion to stay at or above 2,300 when rich a peak, should I be going lean a peak first and then pulling the RPMs back? Or is this short duration transient condition is that okay to be rich a peak below 2,300 RPM for a minute or two?
Well, first of all, let's make it clear that the suggestion that it's okay to run below 2,300 if you're lean a peak is mine and not Continental's. But on the other hand, Continental's is a service bulletin, so it is not a requirement; it is a suggestion.
Right.
And so if you want me to continue to crawl out on a limb, I would say it doesn't. I would say it doesn't matter. The short-term exposure to 2,100 RPM prior to transitioning to lean a peak is probably sufficiently brief that it won't make any difference.
Okay.
And you T310R, you've got a fine airplane, lots of personality.
Is that what we're calling it now?
It's actually got some engines that are derated pretty much to 285 horsepower, and those very almost identical engines will put out 310 horsepower or 325 horsepower by putting a bigger blower on the front of them. So they're not; those engines are not particularly highly stressed engines. And the fact that Continental put a ridiculously low TBO on them of 1,400 hours is kind of laughable. Because somebody has to explain to me how you can take that pretty much that same engine, put a bigger blower on it, upgrade it to 310 or 325 horsepower, and have a higher TBO. I don't understand the math on that.
They just forgot to change it. That's all.
Very, very peculiar. But
This is right.
At any rate, I don't see anything wrong with the way you're operating it.
Okay.
I'm interested that you lean one engine and then the other rather than just pull them
I would
both
never
back.
do that.
I've never done that, but
Why would you never do that, Paul? What's bad
I don't know.
about that?
I just pull the mixtures back at the same time and avoid the.
well, I have this horrible feeling that I don't want to turn over a rock and see a whole bunch of ants crawling around underneath, but I have this horrible feeling that the reason he's doing it is because he's trying to lean via EGT, which is a whole.
Oh, you're not doing that.
Lecture. I'm not sure we have even the time for that one.
No, I typically go to, I've still got the old fuel pressure gauge. So usually that's real responsive. So I use that and pull it back.
You just pull back to a fuel flow, right?
So where
pressure,
that fuel pressure gauge is, and then the fuel flow gauge catches up a few seconds later. Occasionally I will, from the lean side, go confirm that I am actually lean of peak by moving it the other direction, and I know that cylinder 2 is the last one to lean, so I'll look at that, or the last one to peak, so I'll look at that one. But generally, I can
just the fact that the power goes down when you pull the red knobs back isn't sufficient evidence to you that you're lean a peak. You just have
I have to see
you
it.
just have to
sometimes.
go peak.
And the other thing for me, lean a peak is, and I know it's not a true TIT gauge, but it's got a JPI 760, and the TIT gauge is just a combination of cylinders 2, 4, and 6. But if I don't pull it back too much, that'll be up around 1,650 to 1,700, and I think the turbo max TIT is supposed to be around 1,650. So
yeah,
I do try to keep that below that.
Yeah, I like to try to keep mine at 1,600 or less. It kind of depends on where your probe is. It should be as close to the Y duct as it can get.
Yeah, and it's like right up behind cylinder number 2, maybe just a couple inches behind where that one joins the other, 4 and 6.
Yeah.
I always figured it. I'm curious if it would get cooler as it got closer to the turbo or not. If I actually had a TIT probe that was way back by the turbo.
I think the farther from the exhaust, it gets cooler, right?
Well, but then you have the compression of 3 cylinders or all the cylinders coming together.
Yeah,
Oh,
with
interesting.
the Turbo 310's exhaust configuration, there isn't any good way of putting the probe where it measures all 6 cylinders when they're combined. There's a splitter down the middle of the Y that keeps the two banks separate till the last possible moment as it's emptied into the turbocharger. And so the best you can do is measure. It's like a half TIT.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it sounds like you're leaning it properly.
All right. I'll keep
So,
doing
but-
that.
But why do you do one engine at a time?
Well, I just figure why mess with two things at once?
Okay.
I can move it back.
Yeah.
I understand that. Yep.
I can't argue with that.
No.
I just yank them back together.
That's what I did.
Well, maybe
on
I'll
mine.
try that next time and see if it doesn't fall out of the sky.
It
I've
won't
been
fall.
doing a lot more Lena Pleat climbs. By the way,
When do you transition to that?
I used to always fly as soon as I stopped getting busy after takeoff. You know, I flew home from San Diego on Sunday. Took off, made my turn, contacted departure control, and read back my clearance, and then at that point I transitioned to Lena Peak climb.
So, what, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of manifold pressure, RPM, and fuel flow do you end up with there? Since our airplanes are pretty similar.
I take off with everything full forward. Once the gear comes up, the RPM comes back down to about 2,500, and then when I'm ready to transition, I just yank the mixture controls back to, in my case, my gauges are calibrated in pounds per hour. I pull them back to about 80 pounds per hour per engine. You'd have to convert that to gallons per hour if that's what you're calibrated in.
Okay.
And the limiting factor on that is TIT.
TIT.
If you don't pull it back far enough, the TIT gets a little hot. And the rate of climb goes down obviously when you do that.
Yeah, I've done that.
And the fuel flow is cut by almost in half.
Okay, yeah. My climb right now is about 22.5 gallons per hour.
Yeah. I mean, if I was climbing to flight level 190, I probably wouldn't do that because it'd take a long time to get up there.
Sure.
But anyway, it sounds like what you're doing is fine, although leaning one engine at a time strikes me as curious, but there's nothing wrong with it. Just different.
Okay.
Just keep doing what you're doing.
All right.
Don't listen to these guys. You're fine.
Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
Have fun with your nice airplane.
All right. Thank you.
See you, Jesse.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, so I'm excited to read these letters. They're all about the Challenger oil filter, and believe it or not, that one question resulted in the most letters we've ever had about any one subject.
Wow!
It is a very I guess if people are really interested, but also there is a thread going on the Vans forum right now about how good or bad it may be. Which
how bad?
Yes. Yeah. But first, actually, was one from Richard, and this is kind of related to the filter, but more so about the process. He said, longtime listener to the podcast, and I had a question about the 337 procedure for using the Challenger oil filter that was discussed on a previous podcast. How difficult is it to get a 337, and do mechanics charge a lot for this kind of service? He has one, he just hasn't installed it yet.
No, it's 10 minutes to fill out a 337. You put it in the mail, it's done. It's no big deal.
And if you're worried about it, fill it out yourself and then get the mechanic to sign it.
Yeah. It's not.
So you're not, yeah.
So
you
what,
fill
you
it out
charge
online.
An hour,
They're not going
Paul?
to charge a minimum of an hour to do it.
Yeah, some will
gonna
charge
say
an
charge an
hour
hour.
because they have to, lick the envelope and put it in the mailbox. It requires walking out to the mailbox. I mean, I could see an hour, but it's a simple STC. So all you're going to do is you're going to fill out, who owns the airplane, who did the work, who approved the work, meaning who inspected it, the IA. And then on the back in section 8, there's going to be a description of the work, which is going to be something like installed
oil
Challenger,
filter.
removed old oil filter, installed Challenger oil filter in accordance with STC so-and-so, end.
Safety wired. Okay, yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Because the procedure for installing the filter is all in the STC. You don't have to say what torque you use. You don't have, because that would be duplicating information. And I mean, literally, you do it on your computer. You print 3 of them, front and back, sign all 3, put one in the mail, give one to the airplane owner, and fold one up and put it in the mechanics file just for fun. And that's it. It takes 10 minutes maybe. No, I'm sorry. It takes an hour. It takes an hour. That's right.
It takes an hour.
It takes an hour.
Which according to the FAA should be about $80, right?
85 bucks, right?
85 to be precise.
85 bucks.
All right, good. Okay, so Steve, talking about the mess, Mike, which I think you mentioned. He said you described the reusable oil filter that you were trying out, and you mentioned that the filter doesn't have a drain back valve, and therefore there was no oil in the filter when you went to change it. When I change my filter, I carefully fill it up with clean engine oil before I put it back on. So for me, it's a double mess. Dirty oil draining out of the filter when I pull it off, and trying to keep them clean, oil from draining out when I put it back on. Is this another one of those maintenance myths that pilots are continually falling for?
I've never heard of that.
I've never filled an oil filter with oil before.
Why would you waste all that good oil?
The only reason to do that would be if you were concerned that
it had unprimed.
That the oil pump was
which was
something.
I think the reason that he was.
But I mean, if that were the case, it would have to be down for a period of time. If you're doing an oil change in a day, it's not going to unport the pump. I've not seen it do that, at least. But
So
if
he's
that's what
wasting
you're
oil,
worried about,
making a mess.
if that's what you're worried about, if you have a filter that mounts vertically, in other words, on top, pour oil down in the ports, not in the filter.
In the oil filter.
Just pour some down in the ports until it fills up, because that's where the pump is.
Yeah, but
and
it's
then
normally
screw the filter on.
It's normally not a problem unless the airplane's been
I've
sitting
never
for
heard
a
of that.
long time.
Yeah, I've never
That
put
would make
oil
a
in a
mess.
filter. That's interesting.
Okay. All right, Steve. So you can keep clean next time. All right, and finally to the heart of the matter. This is from Chris, who happens to be Colleen's friend.
Oh, Chris Strike. Okay.
Yep. He said, I wanted to comment on the part of the episode where the team was talking about the Challenger oil filter. I've been using this filter on 2 airplanes for about 12 years.
Oh,
He's got an IO 360 and an IO 540. He says he's had very good experiences with it. Think they're well worth the expense, just on ease of use and inspection. He does mention the argument on the Vans forum. However, he says, I've been running oil analysis on both engines with Blackstone during the entire time that I've had the filters in use, and the data supports that wear metals are all within normal ranges using this filter. I have no reason to believe the filter media is worse than a paper filter.
So what's the argument on the Vans site? I've not heard what their argument is.
Filtration level.
They hired some guys who are overthinking this very seriously, hired some lab to do some comparative testing. And it turns out that there are multiple protocols for doing filter testing.
Oh, I read that.
And they picked a particular protocol that made the paper filters look much better than the reusable filter.
Yeah.
And it turns out that the real question is how small a micron size does the filter effectively filter at, and particles smaller than that size get through. And it turns out that with a filter like the Challenger filter, which is basically made of aluminum that is perforated with a laser to create all these little tiny holes, there's a very well-defined filtration cutoff. The diameter of these holes is very precisely controlled with this laser cutter, and particles, bigger than the hole size get caught, and particles smaller than the hole size don't get caught. It's very simple. With paper filters, where there aren't any holes being drilled, it's a statistical thing. Mm-hmm. If you're a very tiny particle and you're trying to traverse your way through paper filter medium, you're basically going through a forest.
Yeah. Is it an oak tree or a pine tree?
And it's very, very random what you pass as you're going through this forest. It's just all sorts of stuff, and the spacing of the stuff is variable and stuff because it's paper, for Pete's sake. It's not a man-made thing. It's just it. So the way that particle size, the micron level of paper filters is measured is different. It's a statistical thing. It's if the filter is rated at 40 microns, that does not mean that anything smaller than 40 microns goes through, anything bigger than 40 microns gets caught. It means that things bigger than 40 microns have some percentage confidence of being caught. It's a very statistical thing. And some of these protocols involve running the fluid through the filter n times and measuring how much gets through after n passes through the filter. It's not, these testing protocols are very different. And it turns out that one of the standard protocols, the paper filters look a lot better than the Challenger filter, and the other testing protocols, the results are reversed, and it really depends on how you measure this stuff. Again, my theory is that when the stuff gets small enough, it just doesn't matter anymore. Small stuff cruises through the engine, doesn't do any damage, doesn't get embedded in bearings or anything that we worry about. And so after studying it personally, I mean, I did my usual over Googling before I made the decision to try these Challenger filters on my engines, because I'm obviously a total nutcase when it comes to engine longevity. And I came to the conclusion that the Challenger filters were fine, and that they wouldn't adversely affect longevity. But there's this contingent on the Vance Forum that did this laboratory testing and came to the conclusion that the filters were terrible, and that they convinced a lot of Vance owners who were using them to go back to paper filters.
Yeah.
So yeah. I have a non-Overthinkers Anonymous question. So bear with me and don't kick me out of the group. In my years of working on airplanes, I do not recall ever seeing an engine damaged or worn out or anything occur bad because it had a filter that didn't do its job. I can't think of ever a case. Now, I can think of a case when an engine comes apart and there are pieces in the oil sump with part numbers on it that get, but that's not what I'm talking about. When a filter, instead of 20 microns, it's 40 or it's 80, whatever it is. I mean, the old screens that we had on the Lycomings and Continentals when they first came out in the 60s, I have no clue what they were doing, but my goodness, it was a wire mesh. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm really struggling to conceive of a situation or to even identify an engine that wore out or came apart or fell out of the sky or didn't last as long because it had this filter versus that filter. So
I agree. The worst thing that a filter can do is go into bypass.
Right.
If it plugs up, then and goes into bypass, then all sorts of stuff can just cruise on through and get into the oil galleries. So that going into bypass is a bad thing. And one of the claims to fame of the Challenger filter, and remember the origin of the Challenger filter is the Challenger filter is actually made by another company that designed it for use in drag racers. And it's basically, its claim to fame is as a filter for racing cars. And then the Challenger got an STC to adapt it for aviation use. But the reason that its claim to fame in racing cars is that it has a much lower delta P. In other words, the pressure loss going through the Challenger filter is much lower than the pressure loss going through a paper filter. And the fact that it has a much lower delta P means it's almost impossible for it to go into bypass. So to me, that was kind of a plus, but
not that I've ever had a filter that went into bypass.
And then a bunch of people wound up converting to the Challenger filter when you couldn't get paper filters. You remember we had a huge supply chain problem on those things.
The question. Yeah.
And I actually changed at a later time. I wasn't having any problem getting the paper filters, but I was just sort of intrigued to try it out. And I kind of like, the stuff that I saw about it. And then after I did my first oil change, I said, I wonder if this is going to be a big mess compared to cutting open a paper filter. And my experience was the opposite. It's less messy than the paper filter.
Colleen, did you change? You were talking about switching.
I haven't yet, but it's on my to-do list. I don't have to do an oil change right now, but probably, and I just bought a box of filters, so I'm kind of stuck with paper. But I intend to make the switch as soon as I need a new filter.
Actually, she's just dreading the Form 337 part.
Oh, that's it. Do you know any IAs that would sign that off in less than an hour?
No.
Oh, man.
So speaking of the inspection part, Mike, I think actually, Paul, you asked Mike if he used a magnet to go over and see the many metal. So
I actually didn't, but I will next time. The Challenger filter itself has a very strong magnet in it.
Yes, and Chris points that out. He says I'll point out there's an installed magnet in the base of the filter element.
Yeah.
And it makes it easy to inspect for the various particles.
Chris likes his
catches all of them.
And he's got lots of experience with them. So there you go.
Yeah. I think, Paul, that's a great point about the screens. I mean, if it mattered that much, it's like every old Continental Lycoming would be coming apart at 500 hours or whatever, and they're just not. So
there's still some of them out there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we all like full flow filters better than those screens, but I think more because they give a better ability to inspect rather than because they do such a much better job of filtering. I mean, the oil filter has kind of this dual role. I mean, first of all, it protects the engine, but it's also the most important tool that we have for determining the condition of the bottom end of the engine.
Yep.
Because we can't really go in there and look at it. We have to, the oil filter is our most important tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
interesting.
Certainly the people who disagree with you will be writing in for next episode. Yes. So we'll look forward to that.
That's how we prime the pump.
Yes.
We throw out controversial things and then just wait for the mailbag.
Just toss it and walk away.
The Challenger filter people are sitting by looking at all this and saying, all publicity is good publicity.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sure they are. Yeah. Well, if they have a good product, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I think they do have a good product. That's my
no junk in a landfill. That's the bottom line.
that is
really gross
added
cost savings.
Yeah, that's an added part.
And I'm not going to cut my arm off cutting that filter.
Yeah, we have 55-gallon drums full of old cut filters too. It's just I never even really thought about that, but
that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from Rick, who experienced some infant mortality. Tell us about it, Rick. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me on. I bought a 1978 J model Mooney. It's got an IO 360 last July. And the engine had 220 hours since the major overhaul, which was done about 3 years prior to me buying it. It didn't fly a whole lot the year prior to me buying it. And at my first annual, the A&P noted that there was some brass flakes and valve guide wear on cylinder 1, corrosion on cylinder 3, and all 4 cylinders were bypassing oil through the rings. So
picky.
I know, right? So we flew it another 20 hours and then to take it back to have it re-inspected. And at that time, it had fouled lower plugs with no cylinder improvement whatsoever. So thinking it was the right thing to do at the time, I opted for a top overhaul, which we did. And I flew it for an additional 27 hours of break-in mineral oil. And I did the break-in at 72 to 75% power, 3,000 feet, full rich. The only issue that we had during the break-in was an electronic mag that we had on the plane, on the right mag, and it had failed a couple mag checks, had little engine roughness, and so we replaced the wiring harness for that mag. At the break-in oil change, when we changed over to regular oil, the cylinders were inspected, everything was noted in good condition. About 30 hours later, on a descent from a cross-country flight, we got a high CHT indication on the number 2 cylinder. We reduced power, opened the cowl flaps to cool it, which it did, and a few minutes after that into the descent, the oil pressure began to drop, and at that time I only had the analog gauge, and it was dropping down into the yellow. After we landed, the belly was coated with oil. We checked the oil. The oil was at 2.5 quarts.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Ow.
So my A&P inspected, checked compressions, and it turns out that it had broken rings on 3 of the 4 new cylinders. We chose to hone all 4 of the cylinders, replaced the rings and pistons on all 4 cylinders. We started it up, and the only issue was the engine quit on the right mag check again, which was that electronic mag. We replaced the electronic mag with an engine-driven mag, and now we're at 54 hours since the pistons and rings were replaced, and thankfully we have no issues so far. In fact, the plane is over at the shop right now getting its 25-hour oil change and inspection. So not having any idea as to why this issue could have come up is a little unsettling to me. So I'm just curious. My question is, what are some possible causes that could have led to a broken rings on 3 or 4 new cylinders?
Well, just so I get all the information in my head, what electronic ignition did you have?
It was electro air.
Electro air. So and also, did you have the advanced timing feature?
I do not know that.
And was that installed prior to you owning the airplane?
It was. It was on the plane when I bought it.
But it isn't anymore.
It is not anymore.
Yeah.
And we've not had any issues since, but I don't know that that's a direct cause of the issues that we had.
Rick, you say in your write-up that the piston rings were improperly installed. You didn't mention that.
No, I said they were checked to see if they were improperly installed, and they were not. They were installed correctly.
Oh, I'm
okay.
sorry. Okay, they were not installed improperly. 2 negatives.
That's
Got
correct.
it. Sorry.
That is correct.
Sorry. That's good.
But if you had broken rings on 3 out of the 4 cylinders, then something was wrong with how those rings were installed. Presumably, maybe the ring gaps were not correct. They were not adequate.
Yeah. I mean,
but
and
something a lot more than broken rings happened. That some of those piston photos that you sent showed a lot of molten aluminum smeared on the outside of the piston and fouling the rings and stuff. So that piston got god awful hot. Yeah. And then your engine monitor data had been uploaded to the Savvy platform, so I went and took a look at it, And there was this CHT event that you mentioned was a quite remarkable event. This one happened in cylinder number 1, and the upper trace is showing manifold pressure, I believe, and so it shows how the lower one is the cylinder head temperature. And it shows how the cylinder head temperature very rapidly rose from 400 Fahrenheit, which is a normal temperature, to 450 degrees, at which point you very briskly pulled back the power, which was a good thing that you did, because I think that CHT would have continued rising quite rapidly had you not done that. And might have wound up holding the piston or something even more dramatic. But when I see a CHT excursion like this, one of the first things I do is take a look at the rate of rise. And we use a little tool on the platform that calculates the rate of rise. And in this case, you can see in the right-hand column there for CHT1, that CHT rose from 400 to 450 degrees at a rate of 0.7 of a degree per second. That's a very rapid rise. I sort of have a rule of thumb that when I see rises at a rate of about a degree per second or higher, the only thing that can cause that is a pre-ignition event.
Okay.
Because it takes an enormous amount of energy to heat a cylinder head up that rapidly. Cylinder head's a big chunk of metal with a lot of thermal mass, and to heat it up a degree per second requires a tremendously violent event. Yours wasn't quite at a degree per second, but it was awful close. It was 0.7 of a degree per second. So it looks to me like you had a pre-ignition event, and you definitely had molten aluminum floating around in there, fouling the rings on that cylinder. We got some good pictures of that. And another thing, go ahead, Colleen.
The other cylinders are fine, though. There's nothing wrong.
Yeah, this was isolated to cylinder number 1.
So why did rings break on the other ones?
And then when those may be 2 independent things.
Okay.
Because typically broken rings, you can fly around with broken rings and not even know it.
You just get blow by, right?
In
the oil.
You probably get some reduced compression and stuff, but normally broken rings do not cause anything violent to occur. The broken rings are typically pretty benign. They'll cause vertical scoring in the cylinder bore because they have sharp edges and stuff. But something pretty dramatic happened there in cylinder number 1. And Ian, I had one other picture where I kind of backed off and showed the entire cruise portion of the flight for all of the cylinders. And if you look there, that red trace that has the big spike about 3/4 of the way down the flight, that was the one that we were looking at. But you'll notice it has several other excursions, not quite as dramatic, and probably ones that you didn't notice. But there was something going on with that cylinder leading up to that event. That it had a couple of like minor CHT runaways before the big one. So it's a little hard to identify precisely what caused that violent runaway. Like I said, it's really good that you caught that one and pulled the power back right away. Because they could have probably had a whole lot more engine damage had you not done that. And all of those, if you look at all of the CHT excursions that come before that on cylinder number 1, they all have very high, angles of rise. They all rise very, very rapidly, and then they typically fall away more slowly.
Mike, we were controlling the temperature. The temperature was going up. Of course, the cowl flaps were closed when we were in cruise flight. And as we were starting to get these increases in temperature, we would crack open the cowl flaps to help cool it down. So that could possibly be.
But I'm talking about rises that are occurring in 30 seconds or something like that. They're very, very, very rapid rises,
Okay.
not
The
ones
ones
that
that
are
look like
happening over
mountain
periods
peaks.
of minutes. And if you look at the rest of the cylinders, you're not seeing those sorts of spikes in any of the cylinders but cylinder one. So something was going on with cylinder one.
The piston, the picture we have of the piston, is that piston number 1?
I'm not sure which one that came from. I did
Well,
not.
Well,
label.
there was one that just seemed to have a lot of molten aluminum floating around that looked pretty scary.
That's my guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in the area next to a spark plug, not next to a valve.
What you mean, the molten?
Yeah, the molten.
Where, on the side?
Yeah. So this would have been, if we're thinking pre-ignition, that is next to a spark plug. It'd be
one possible
if that was a
cause.
spark plug connected to an electronic ignition.
Yeah, I mean, one possible cause of pre-ignition is it like a cracked spark plug insulator. Another possible cause, and we've seen some problems in the past with electrowares having problems with what they call the MTU, the timing unit that provides the timing pulses that tells the ignition system when to fire.
Mm-hmm.
And the MTUs have a plastic gear in there that has a habit of shedding teeth, and but I don't think that that's the case here, because if the MTU failed, you'd be seeing bizarre things happening in all four cylinders, not just the one.
Yeah.
It could be a cracked spark plug insulator. It could be. I've seen this thing happen where a spark plug wasn't properly torqued and started backing out, losing its heat sink, and then getting really, really hot. But something was causing pre-ignition in that cylinder.
Yeah, I think the rings being broken are not directly related to this event on this piston.
Okay.
I think there were a couple of things going on.
Yeah, the broken rings tend to be a little bit more benign because the ring can't go anywhere. It's trapped in the groove and stuff, and it just doesn't seal as well.
So the broken rings could be incorrect parts, incorrectly installed with the wrong gap.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the two things that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, otherwise they will break if they get embrittled due to overheat.
But they didn't get hot.
They didn't. They all of them didn't get hot. One got hot, but that was a very short duration.
Yeah.
And then you have all the molten aluminum from the piston getting down in the groove, so that kind of tosses that out.
But I thought if the ring got real hot, it would get annealed rather than brittle. It would get soft, right, and lose its springiness. No.
Well, that's probably true, but
I need to go back to school and get my metallurgy degree. That's all there is to it.
I don't know how that would. They're not getting that hot, but I just have a feeling that when they do get hot, it seems like they like to start breaking apart. Maybe
that one piston definitely got awfully hot.
Yeah, you had an event on cylinder number 1. The piston rings, I think, are a different event, not an event, but a different problem.
And that's a pretty high compression piston. That deep dish piston is, I think, an 8.7 to 1 piston.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts with replacing the pistons and the rings and continuing to fly the plane? Is there anything I should have done other than that?
No, I don't think so.
No, you got rid of the electronic ignition, which I think is a good idea.
Yep.
If you want electronic ignition, I could say SureFly, because it's a much different system.
We've had good luck with the SureFly.
Yeah. And don't use the advanced timing feature on a Mooney. That's a great little plane. My sister flew that airplane after we rebuilt one in the Air Race Classic in 1978.
It's a lot of fun to fly.
Yeah, that's a tough little engine, but it can't handle pre-ignition.
And I saw that there was something you sent something off to Continental, and they said something about detonation, but my calculations were that engine was developing about 55% power.
Yeah.
At the time, rich of peak, and it's pretty darn hard to get detonation at 55% power. So, I think it's much more likely a pre-ignition.
They probably use the wrong term.
Yeah.
Another thing Rick should be doing is checking the spark plugs in that cylinder to see if you have a cracked plug, because you don't want it to happen again, right?
Yeah.
I'll pass that up. I'll pass that along today. It's in the show.
Do you use massive or fine wire plugs in that engine?
It's got fine wire in it.
Yeah, Tempest.
Yeah, and are they Champion fine wire plugs? Because
they are Champion.
Oh, get rid of those.
We've had the Champion fine wire plugs are much more prone to cracking. The nose core insulator is much more prone to cracking than any other spark plug, and I would definitely not use the Champion fine wire plugs. I'm going to get hate mail now from Champion lovers, but Champion. But
that's okay. I have several boxes
if you want
to plugs.
Yeah, if you want to use fine wire plugs, that the Tempest ones are built in a more robust fashion. The massive electrode plugs very seldom crack unless somebody drops them on the floor, but the Champion fine wire plugs have a track record of having cracked insulators, and those can lead to pre-ignition events.
You're not going to believe
we'll get
this.
that checked today.
I know this is a very anti-aviation statement, but the Tempest fine wire plugs cost less than the Champion.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just saying, what I think is the better product costs less money, and I know that goes against everything we've ever been taught, but.
Well, that's
now,
awesome.
Is there any danger of any kind of molten metal getting into other places in the cylinder in the airplane engine? I don't think.
Well, it would
the cylinder.
It would either get caught in the suction screener in the oil filter. It probably wouldn't.
So you might want to
get
check those
any
places
place
too.
where. Yeah.
Or blast out the exhaust.
The last oil analysis that it had at the last oil change came back great. So there was nothing in the filter.
We're talking about after the event, though. Yeah.
This was the last oil analysis was after the event.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
No, the oil analysis might not catch molten metal, but we're talking chunks of stuff.
Yeah, we're talking parts per part, not parts per million.
In the suction screen, so that might be worth checking, or to cut the filter open, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, always cut the filter open.
Yeah, but the suction screen is really important to look at.
Yeah, but I hope those rings get installed properly and you don't have this issue again. That's very disconcerting.
Make sure that they check the ring gaps, or before the rings go on the piston. They're supposed to be placed into the choked part of the cylinder and then measured with a gauge to make sure that the gap is within the required range.
Okay, thank you.
If you just take the rings out of the box, put them on the piston, and stick them in the cylinder, you can't be sure that that's going to be right.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Okay. Sorry for the trouble, Rick.
That's
tough, but
you're in good shape now, though.
That's good. Good photos and good data, though. It's kind of nice to be able to nail that down like that.
Well done.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me.
All right, Rick.
Okay.
Thanks for the call.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And just like that, we've come to the end of another podcast and the end of 2024. We've had a ball doing this, and we appreciate our listeners for continuing to send in interesting and challenging questions. Kick off the new year with an email to us at podcasts@aopa.org and let us take a swipe at your toughest problems. Have a happy and safe new year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.